Hi, I'm Nick Kramer, Program Manager for Graph in Microsoft Teams platform, and this is Microsoft Teams in Graph. For those of you who are not familiar with Graph, it's a unified REST API for the whole company. It allows you to get data from the Microsoft applications using a single interface. And it brings this power to the Teams platform. Teams has a lot of great functionality which you're already familiar with for building high-performing teams. We have extensible tabs and bots, connectors, activity feeds, actionable messaging, let you create rich cards that are not just text but also buttons in them, messaging extensions so you can add your business objects into these messages, and Graph is another extensibility point. Graph is a little different than these others because you can use Graph with those other extensibility points. You can call Graph APIs from your tabs. You can call Graph APIs from your bots, use them in your connectors and your messaging and your extensions. But you can also use Graph APIs outside all of those other Teams apps. You can call Graph APIs from a website that doesn't run in Teams. You can call Graph APIs from a service that doesn't even have a UI. And you can call Graph APIs from a command line utility. My favorite thing to do with Graph APIs is to automate team life cycles. I can create a new team, add members and owners to the team, configure team settings in the team. I can add channels to the team, install applications into the team, even set up tabs in the team, and get a fully functional team all with a single script. And then my team can execute, send messages to each other, collaborate, and be productive. And when the time comes, when that team has run its life cycle, we can archive the team, save it for later if we have to refer back to it, or we can even delete the team, all automatically. Let's show an example of this. So Contoso Airlines is the largest airline you've never heard of, with nonstop flights daily to Redmond. They are really into Microsoft Teams. They like to create a new team for every flight they fly, and they're flying 200 flights a day, so that's a lot of teams. So the way they do it is they have a program that creates these teams every night at midnight when no one's around. It creates the teams for the next day, and then that team sticks around for a couple days, and then the program will automatically archive those teams so those teams get out of the way while still being saved in our records in case we need to see them later. So and we're going to run this one with application permissions because this is happening at midnight, but for demo purposes I've also added in user delegated permissions, which we'll get into later, but just for now we'll just use the user application permissions rather. And let's check out what you need to do to create a team using the Graph APIs. The first step to creating a team is figuring out who you want in that team. So for us, we'll have the captain and the administrator as the owners of that team. We start with UPNs, which is basically their email address, and then we need to translate that into Graph syntax. Graph wants a user ID, so we'll check out the logic for that. So for each UPN, all we do is we do a HTTP GET call to /users/UPN, or the fully qualified name would be graph.microsoft.com/v1.0/users/UPN. I'll omit all the boilerplate there in the future. So we'll do a HTTP GET to that path, and then it'll return a full object, and the only part of that object we care about is the ID. So we'll do a REST call. That gets back the user ID we need. User ID is a GUID. We will add that to our list. We'll do that a couple more times. And that's our, how we get the user IDs for our owners list. We're going to do a similar thing for the members. We'll start with a series of UPNs for the flight crew. Again, we'll add the admin and the captain to the members list as well. And then we'll translate those into user IDs. And that's how we have our members and owners ready to go. Next step we need to do, before we create a team, we have to have a group to put this team into. So we will do an HTTP post to /groups, and we'll specify some group stuff. We need a display name. This is going to be Flight 157. We need a mail nickname, which is also Flight 157, but without the space. We have a description, everything about Flight 157. We get to specify the visibility, whether this is a public or a private team. We will go with private. We don't want anyone being able to add themselves to the team. We get to specify the owners and the members of the team. And then there's a couple properties that are going to be the same for every team. Every team will have a group whose group type is unified. Mail enabled is going to be true for all teams, and security enabled is going to be false. And when we do that, that'll create a group. And every team belongs in exactly one group. Every group can have either 0 or 1 teams. And so there's a close correlation between your group and your team. In fact, your team has the same ID as the group. So group ID and team ID are interchangeable concepts. So we've created a group. Now we need to put a team in it. HTTP put /groups/group ID/team. And then if you want, you can just pass an empty payload. We'll specify a few settings in here just to show that it can be done. We will specify that we don't want guests creating, updating, or deleting channels. We'll set all those abilities to false. And we'll run that. And you'll see the team show up over here on the left. Flight 157 is now created. I'll also just call out here a little bit of real world. We have some retry logic in here. If you create your team too quickly, it is possible to get into a race condition where the group has been created, but the team services don't know the group has been created. So, real simple solution. If that happens to you, wait 10 seconds, try again. If it happens more than 3 times, don't keep trying. Something else is wrong. And then we'll store away that ID we get back. Group.id is the same as the team ID. We'll need that for future requests. Now we have a team there, it has some members in it, but it's kind of a boring team right now. Let's go ahead and create some channels. Let's create a channel called pilots. We need to pass in the display name and the description when we create a new channel. And to create the channel, we do post /teams/team ID/channels. And that'll create a new channel for us. Here we go over here. One more channel is going to be our pilots channel. And it'd look even better if we put some tabs in it. How about we put a map into our channel describing the layout of the airport? We can create a new tab by doing an HTTP post to /teams/ID/channels/ID/tabs. And to create a tab, you need a couple things. First, you need a display name. What are you going to call the tab? We're not very creative, so I'll just call it map. You also need to specify what Teams application is going to be backing the tab. We're going to use the website application. And its URL, you pass in a full URL to the app definition. And its app ID, its app definition is located at /appcatalog/teamsapp/app ID. And the app ID for this is, since it's a built-in one, it has a funny ID. Its ID is actually com.microsoft.teamspace.tab.web. More typically, for a third-party app, you'll usually see a GUID there, but really it's actually whatever the app author felt like putting there, so you can see some interesting stuff in those strings. And so that's the app ID for the website tab. We also want to provide some configuration. If we just stop now, we'd get a tab called Maps associated with the website, but it wouldn't be associated with any particular website. It would be an empty tab that would ask us, hey, what website do you want to show the first time you open it? We can do better than that. We can configure it in code. So we will specify the 4 magic properties that apply to all tabs. When configuring any tab, there's 4 magic properties. Entity ID, that's null for this tab. Content URL, that's the URL we want to show for the website. Website URL is the website URL that you go to if you want to see that web page in a browser. There's a little button in the tab that says, show this in a browser. That's the website it goes to. So usually it'll be the same as the content URL, but you can make it different if you so want. And then there is a remove URL, which is what happens when you go to remove that tab and do a cleanup. We don't need any for here, so we'll just make it null. All right, when we give that a moment, it will pop into our pilots channel over here. Actually, I've got to show the pilots channel before you'll see the pilots channel. And then we'll open it up. We'll see a nice little picture of our airport here. We like to land the planes here right on 156th Avenue. It's really fun to watch how they time the lights. They can get it right in there between the stoplights. All right, so another little trick, almost everything I'm showing you today is possible today with the V1 API set. I'll show you one beta trick, one trick that's in beta right now, and hopefully it won't stay in beta too much longer. I will get the deep link to the channel we just created. So earlier we created a channel. We will read back that channel definition with HTTP GET. We'll get the channel. URL is going to be /team/teamid/channels/channel ID. And it's going to return one magic property we're interested in, and that is called web URL. V1 has a web URL for a team. Beta recently added a web URL for a channel. And with that, you can create a hyperlink that will take users of your website directly to the channel you just created. All right, but we can also use, it's not just about Teams, we can also use existing Graph APIs for SharePoint and Planner and other Microsoft workloads. Let's check out what we can do with SharePoint. Let's create a SharePoint list of some of the challenging passengers on this flight. So the first step is to get the team site. There's a concept of team site in SharePoint. So we do an HTTP GET to /groups/ID/sites/root. And that gets us the team site, essentially the root of the SharePoint stuff. Again, there's some retry logic in there because if you ask SharePoint too quickly after creating the group, it doesn't know about the group yet. So you want to have some retry logic in there in case you ask quickly enough. Second step to creating a list is actually creating an actual list, telling SharePoint, hey, we want a list in this site, and that list is going to have columns called name, seat number, and notes. And so to create the list definition, you post to /sites/ID/lists, pass in that payload describing the columns, and that'll create the raw data holder, if you will. There's no real data in the list, but at least SharePoint knows there's supposed to be a list there with those columns. And then we have to add some passengers to our challenging passenger list. We'll do that by posting to /sites/ID/lists/list/ID/items. And this is going to be an easy flight because there's only one challenging passenger we added. And so we've just built the data for that list in SharePoint, but we haven't showed it anywhere. So we'll add another tab using the tricks we've learned earlier. Post /teams/ID/channels/ID/tabs. Same as we did earlier for our earlier tab. We will pass in a display name, challenging passengers. We'll pass in the Teams app is going to be equal to website. We're going to use the same content and website URL. Null is the default value for the entity ID and the remove URL. We'll go ahead and do that. And if you give it a moment, we will have our challenging passenger list. Give it a moment. Apparently I am the challenging passenger. What's up with that? Why am I the challenging passenger? Snores loudly. Well, it is true. I do snore pretty loudly, so I guess if I fell asleep on the plane, it'd be kind of challenging, wouldn't it? All right, fair enough. I guess it is working correctly. All right, and so that's our quick demo of creating a new team using Graph APIs. And so everything I showed you was done with application permissions. If you want to do the same thing with user delegated permissions, you can. One trick I'll show you next that does require user-delegated permissions today is installing apps to a team. And soon we will be making that available with application permissions, but today it's only user-delegated permissions. Another common workflow here is you want to be able to enumerate all the teams you have in the tenant and add an app to them. You have a new shiny app, you're really excited about its potential to help your team out. You want to deploy it to a whole bunch of teams. And if you have a whole bunch of teams in a big organization, you don't want to go through every single team manually in the UI, click here, click here, click here, click here. You want to be able to just blast this thing out. So let's show how you can do that. First step is, as we said, this is not available with application permissions today, but hopefully soon. So we have our app ID. We're going to install SurveyMonkey into the team. The first step of installing an app to all teams is figuring out what all teams are. And we have a little function here called getAllTeams, which does what it says. For demo purposes, we'll also restrict this to teams that start with Flight 157, because we actually don't want to touch every single team in the universe. The VIP customers team doesn't really need SurveyMonkey, but all the other ones do. And let me show you what getAllTeams looks like. I have a couple different variations on it depending on what semantics you want, how many alls you really want. For this, I have I'm actually listing the teams that this particular person is a member of, that the current user is a member of, /me/join teams. But what I could have done instead was I could have gotten a list of all teams in a tenant, and I'll tell you about that one because it's a little more in depth. Join teams is a simple get/me/join teams. That's the answer. To get all the teams in the tenant is a little bit more tricky. You need to actually get the list of all groups in the tenant, and then look for groups rather that have a team associated with them. So you get all groups by doing get/groups, and you pass in a select clause because you're going to want a few extra properties to be returned to you that are not normally returned. And also you can filter out all the properties you don't care about. So here we're going to select only the ID, the resource provisioning options, and the display name properties, because those are the only 3 properties I care about. And that'll get me a list of groups, all groups in the tenant, and then I can filter out only those. I only want the groups whose resource provisioning options contains team. Any group that has a team has a resource provisioning options that says team. And so that's how I can find all the teams in the tenant really quickly. And again, because I have all the groups, I trivially know all the teams because the team ID is the same as the group ID. So that's our list of teams. And once you have a list of teams, installing apps to them is a matter of going through each team, figuring out if that team is already archived. That's the one trick here. You want to get the status of the team here, get/team/ID, look at the archive property. If it's archived, you're not allowed to touch the apps. It's a read-only team. So if the team is not archived, then we do the next step. We see if the app is already installed to the team by doing get http get to /teams/ID/installed apps. And that'll tell us which apps are installed in the team. And we'll also, while we're there, we also expand out and get some extra additional information from that request. We'll do a $expand equals teams app definition. So that means tell me all the installed apps, and for each of those installed apps, please give me the full definition of the teams app definition property. A teams app installation is really 2 things. It's a pointer to the version of the app you're running, and it's a pointer to the definition of the app. So the installation record is not that interesting unless you also see the teams app definition.
I have to make you cut. Sorry. That nasty noise. Oh, yeah. Super unhelpful. Great.
Hey, we are I purchased a
I
Recording
am going to take advantage of this drink opportunity.
It's okay.
Okay,
Do it
good.
again.
Okay, thank you. That's why we need the light.
Have the sign tomorrow.
Yeah.
Sign is coming. Good,
Arrives
good,
by 8 p.m. today.
good. Okay, fantastic.
Doesn't really come in tonight.
Yeah.
All right.
Sign. Yeah. Okay, but you were sorry. I'm sorry. You were totally on a roll. That was
I
awesome.
do not know exactly where.
You were
we need
talking
to
about
stop.
you expanded the information
Yeah.
to get extra information, and that an app installation definition was really two different parts.
Yeah.
That's where you were. So, okay, wait 3, 2, 1.
All right, and so what we're going to do is we'll get the apps that are already installed, see what's already installed here. We will HTTP get to /teams/ID/installed apps. And then when we ask for that, we're going to ask for some additional information. The installed app record is really two things. It's a pointer to the app definition, and it's a pointer to the version of the app that you have installed. We really need that app definition because that's where all the interesting things are. It's where the app name is, it's where the app ID is. So we're going to ask Graph to include the Teams app definition in the payload it sends back to us. Expand that data out for us. And so we'll do that. We'll take a look at the data it sends back. You can see it has every team actually has quite a few apps already installed by default. It's pretty impressive. And so you'll see there's an ID for the installation record. And then there's the Teams app definition that's expanded out. It tells us the name of the app, forms in this case. It tells us the app ID. Teams app ID is going to be some GUID I won't read off. And so that's the key information we're going to need. And so we're just going to loop through all of those things until we find a team that doesn't have SurveyMonkey already in its app installation list. And then we're going to install it. Let's run to this. And it's going to be post/teams/ID/installed apps. And we're going to add a reference to the app ID. So basically, we're going to put in a URL to the app installation, app definition resource. So it's going to be graph.microsoft.com/v1/app catalogs/teams app/ whatever that app ID GUID was. And you're going to put this inside a trivial record that says, that puts a name on that thing. The name of the property you're going to assign that value to is teamsapp@odata.bind. That @odata.bind is a funny graph way of saying, hey, the value of Teams app is not a string. This is actually a pointer to a larger object. All right, when we do that, that'll install SurveyMonkey to our team. And if we're lucky, I got the right team on the first go here. There's more than one Flight 157 in the system since we've been doing this for many days. And you'll see Flight 157 now has SurveyMonkey installed, ready for business. All right, we'll do that for a bunch of other teams. All right. Now, another trick you can use is you saw that the team I used so far, I specified a whole bunch of properties in code. I specified the team name in code. I specified that these teams are going to have a pilot channel in code, and my code says it's called pilots. If I changed my mind sometime and wanted to call it, I don't know, the pilot place instead of the pilot channel, I would have to go change the code. A great way to do this, if you want this to be end-user editable, is to create a prototype team and then copy the team. And there's a nice little function called clone team that will do that for you. So here we've created a prototype team, and there is a channel called pilot place, and it has a couple other channels as well, the ground crew channel, flight attendants channel. And it's all set up, and I could edit it, and without having to write any code, I can rename those, do whatever I want. So that's a great way to make it end user editable. So let's just show how we can do that, how we can clone an existing team. What we'll do is we'll post to /teams/ID/clone. And then we'll pass in a little body saying what exactly we want to clone, what does the new team look like. We're going to specify the display name of the new team. It's going to be Flight 4157. We're going to specify a male nickname, just like we did at the beginning of the demo. We're going to specify a description. We can choose to specify a team visibility. We're going to do private again. Public's also a choice. And finally, you get to specify which parts of that first team do you want to clone. We're going to clone the applications and the settings and the channels from that prototype team. You can also choose to clone the tabs and clone the members if you want to clone those. So you get to choose which parts you want to clone. And when we send that, the request will start. What we'll see is that what Teams returns back is an operation. Cloning can take a while depending on how big the team is. And so what Teams returns back is an operation object that says, well, we heard your request, we've started, check back here periodically to see if it's done yet. So the header, the location header will tell you the URL of the operation object. And then you periodically check back. You do an HTTP GET on the URL that you just got back, operation URL, and then it'll return one of two things here. It'll say the operation failed. Three things. Operation failed, operation succeeded, or operation is still running are your three choices. If it failed, obviously you failed, you have your error path. If it succeeded, you're done. There's one little bit of information you want to take out of the operation object. Get the target resource ID is the ID of the team you just created. And if the operation is still going, sleep for 10 seconds or wait for 10 seconds and then try again. All right, and then now that we've created the team by cloning, we can put in a different crew than the prototype team had. And we'll, very similar to what we saw before. We start with UPNs. We translate that into a object ID. And we post to /groups/ID/members/$ref. That's another one of those graph magic that says, we're not passing you the definition of the user, we're passing you a pointer to the user. And then last step, always make sure that if you are adding someone who should be an owner, you add them to both the members and the owners list. If you do one or the other, teams might be okay, but other graph properties may not. So save yourself some trouble and always make sure if you're an owner, you're also a member. All right, and last step, yeah, we can close by getting that web URL that I talked about earlier. Come on, you can do it. All right, run the cursor. All right, I mentioned earlier how we recently added a web URL to a channel. We've always had one for team. Here it is. And that can be our hyperlink that we display to the user. It says, click here to go to the team we just created. And then just to point it out here, over here is the team we created. It already had SurveyMonkey installed because we cloned the installed app list. All right, last trick. We've created a couple teams. If you create a whole bunch of teams every day for many days in a row, you will end up with a whole lot of teams. And so we want to archive some of those so we can clean up that left rail over there. Let's click Archive Team, see how that's done. And we'll see some similar code here. First thing, if you want to archive all the teams, you need to know what all the teams are. So we go through our same logic we saw earlier to get all teams. We then need to loop over those teams. Similar logic to what we saw before. We see whether the team is already archived, and if it's not, we archive it. Let's jump into this definition here and see the archiving. The archiving is going to look pretty familiar because this is another one of those long-running operations. We initiate the archive by doing a post to /teams/id/archive. We pass an empty body. There's exactly one parameter to archive, and we don't even need it. It's optional. It's going to return back an operation. It's, again, a long-running operation. It passes back the location header of the operation. We will check back to see, hey, are you done yet with that operation? Yes, it is. Okay. And there's no interesting information in the payload. The only interesting information is, yes, you're done with the operation. And as we let this run, we're going to see the teams disappear from our list of teams over here in the left rail. Clear the breakpoint so we can let it fly. But not to worry, the teams are still there. They have not been deleted, and you can go into the little gear icon there to manage your list of teams, and you can see all your archived teams in here. And we have quite a few of them because we've been flying this flight for quite a while. So teams are not gone, they've just been archived. All right. So that's automating team life cycles in a nutshell. Now, let me cover a couple concepts I glossed over a little bit at the beginning. In order to call graph APIs, you need a graph app ID. Every graph call you make is going to include a token that has a graph app ID embedded in it. Your graph app ID is not the same thing as your team's app ID. You have to go to, at some point you need to go to apps.dev.microsoft.com and create a converged application. Let me show you what that looks like. See if I can find the tab I have this in. So you'll end up in a page that looks like this. You will need to specify at a minimum, you'll fill out the name of the application. You will generate a new application secret, whether it's a password or a key pair or a public key. You'll specify platform. I specified web is what I want to use, and I provided a redirect URL and a logout URL. Actually, I didn't provide a logout URL, but should have. And then you get to specify the permissions that your application needs. Now, usually most apps will do either user delegated permissions or application permissions. I chose to do both. That is an option as well. And the most important permission here is group.readwrite.all, which we'll get into in a little bit. But I specified the full list of permissions here. And then those are the only really required fields you have. I'll also point out that if you have a bot in your Teams app, you already have one of these app IDs. The bot ID actually is an AAD graph app ID, and you can use that app ID with your graph calls. Let's talk a little bit more about those permissions. Two types of permissions. There's user delegated permissions, which is good for when there's a user present. If there's a user in front of the keyboard, you should almost always be using user delegated. And if there's no user around, you want application permissions. User delegated permissions mean the app is allowed to do, the things the app is allowed to do intersected with what the user is allowed to do. So if a user is running an app, and the app might in general be trusted to do a lot of things, but the user is not very trusted, then the user can't do those things in the application. So you want user delegated because that will be the more secure system there. In particular, when you give access to group.readwrite.all, with user delegated, that means give access to, the app can have access to the groups that the user has access to. But if you use application permissions, what you're saying is give that application access to all groups, which is every group in the entire tenant, which is frankly a little scary. You should think twice about asking for that permissions as an app author. One important note here is admin consent is required for both user delegated and application permissions. Group.readwrite.all and group.read.all are both very powerful permissions. And only an admin can consent to that. Only an admin can say, yes, this application is allowed to do this. And I'll show you how they can do that. So before I show you that though, actually I'll do this backwards. I'll show you how the admin can take away permissions from an application, because that'll set me up for the demo. So I go into the portal, Office portal, I click on the Admin Center, and first thing I'll go is go into the AAD page, Azure Active Directory. And this will show me all the graph apps that have been consented to in this tenant. Just give it a couple moments. All right, Enterprise Applications is the tab we want within this. And let's see. Here we go. Contoso Airlines, first hit. And let's just delete this. We are deleting the entry for this tenant, meaning forget any previous consent I gave. We're just going to forget this application had ever been run. And so the next time I launch our app, it's going to act as if I'd never given this app permission before. And we'll see what that permission experience looks like. So I'm running this from an admin account, and first thing it might ask you is, who are you? I have a couple different accounts I can log into. My name today is Megan. And then Graph will ask you, do you agree to this app having these permissions, basically? It's requesting permissions for, it's really just the more verbose version of the page we saw already. All right, and so this is, if I just click accept, that means I can run this app. And if I click this checkbox, consent on behalf of your organization, it means everyone else in my tenant can run this app too. So I'm going to go with just me. I'm going to be greedy. And so this is the user delegated flow I just did. It looks very similar for application permissions. You go to the application as an admin. The admin goes to the application, clicks on a magic link within the application, and you get essentially the same experience. The same, who are you again, which is your account? And now it's just another permissions dialog. The magic words here are accept for your organization. You are accepting on behalf of your organization. Are you cool with that? Yes. Now that application has those application permissions it asked for. All right, and that's permissions in a nutshell. So let's talk about the APIs that are available today. There's APIs, I showed you APIs for managing the team itself, full CRUD operations on the team, as well as cloning a team and archiving and unarchiving a team. We have CRUD operations for members and owners. You can list, add, and remove members and owners of the team. You can change team settings and see the team settings. The PowerShell commandlets that admins use are powered by Graph. There is full CRUD access to the channels as well. List, create, read, update, and delete the channels. Similarly with tabs. List, create, update, delete, configure if you want to think of that as a separate part. Apps, apps installed into Teams. We saw the installed applications property. And then one bit I haven't even talked about is app catalog. It's possible to write a Teams app that is specific to your tenant. It's some internal tool that you don't want to release to the wider world. And so we have an app catalog for that. And there are Graph APIs for that. You can use Graph to list the applications in your application catalog that's specific to you. Or you can publish apps into that app catalog, upgrade those apps, remove them from your catalog even. And as we said earlier, application permissions are supported by almost all of these. Installing apps into a team is not supported yet in application permissions, but we're working hard on that. And then app catalog is the one where application permissions don't really make sense. You don't install that many apps, so many apps that you want to be installing new apps every night at midnight. I also wanted to talk about a couple features that are hot off the presses, recently released. The first one is admin permissions. And this is a concept that admins ought to be able to work on teams they are not owners of. Admins are powerful people. they should have powerful permissions. And with admin permissions, we have now extended that ability to the graph, where if your user token is a global admin or a Teams admin, they can now change settings or add members or change channels within a team they are not a member of or an owner of. So they can work with teams that they don't really want to read messages on or clutter up their left rail with. We also have recently added the ability to configure tabs that use Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and PDF. And recently documented trick for bulk adding members. If you create a team from scratch, I showed you how you add members all in a single request. It's also possible to, if you already created the team and later want to add members, to do that in a single request as well, and that's just recently documented. Also, a couple great APIs we've recently made available in beta. There is a single API, post/teams, that allows you to create a team and channels and settings and tabs all in a single call. And so that's a great way to speed up the process and reduce the performance load on your services if you're concerned about that. We have the channel deep link, the web URL property I mentioned earlier that allows you to give your customers a deep link to the channel you just created. We can also give you the email address for the channel as well. Finally, as I said, everything else is available today. You can get started at https://graph.microsoft.com. Here's a link to that'll take you straight to the Teams portion of Graph. If you want to see the Contoso Airlines sample we just showed, you can see it here at this link. If you'd like to send us feedback, user voice is great for feature requests. Stack Overflow is where questions are appropriate. And if you have something that doesn't fit in any of the above, mail to teamsgraph@microsoft.com. And with that, I want to say thank you, and I look forward to what you build.